So just if you'd like, as you can just whatever you do and do not want to say, it's totally up to you. But I'd like to know a little bit about what life was like before incarceration.
So, Brandon, before incarceration, I was a working mom, going to PTA meetings, taking my kids to cheerleading practice, softball games, football games, and I got caught up. I got caught up with something at work. They were doing some shenanigans with the finances, and I kind of jumped right into that. Worst decision of my life, easily. And once I kind of started doing that, that became a little bit of an addiction. Substance abuse didn't play into my crime, and I would have never thought of myself as having addictive behavior until I started getting that money. And then it definitely became addictive. I got sentenced to 20 years for that. And I spent a little over a decade in prison, did most of my time in Gatesville on the Dr. Lane Murray unit. I started out doing my time, doing everything that I was supposed to. I was going to college. I had enrolled in a vocational class. I was getting not very many disciplinary cases. The disciplinary cases that I was getting were just tiny little petty things. I think I got one because I lost the property slip on my commissary purchase shoes one time. But parole was coming, and they just kept denying me. And my mental health kind of spiraled down. And Brandon, I didn't do my time the easiest way. There in the middle of my sentence, all of the struggles that come with being incarcerated, being away from your family, being in that environment where you just don't have much control. The only thing you do have control over really is your emotions and how you respond to things. And I lost even that control. So, I just kind of spiraled down. I was in and out of medium custody during the middle of my sentence. I'd go G4 and then come back up all the way to get my trustee band, and then mess up again, lash out, and go back down. It was pretty ugly there for a little while, Brandon. I was really low. I was letting the when you get depressed like that, your mind kind of tells you lies about your self-worth. And I was believing some of those lies. And I ended up at Skyview at the psych hospital for about 6 months in the middle of that time. And something just kind of clicked. First of all, I was getting some help from the system. And with that, anytime you go to get any kind of help or any kind of counseling or any kind of programming, and especially in an institution that's created for such a broad group of people, everything's not going to apply to you. And it's easy to kind of just dismiss the entire program because things don't apply directly to your situation. But I was able to pick some gems out of those that were for me. And I think that those seeds planted in the help that I got at Skyview and the little bit of help that was available to me on the unit, I think those kind of started to take root. And one day I just remember saying, Marci, is this going to be you? Is this you acting crazy? Like the officers, I had a reputation now on the unit as, I'll say that again since she stood up, I'm sorry. I had a reputation on the unit now as a bad actor. And I didn't want to be that person. And I had to make a conscious decision to either make the best of the life that I did have, because you do have a life in there. Your family outside is still depending on you in there to act appropriately and not cause even more stress on them. And you do make friendships in there. It wasn't good for me to be known as somebody that acted out all the time. And it was almost just like a switch. I just switched it up just like that. And I changed and I just stopped all of it. In the middle of that, now I had already had a reputation for somebody that was not to be trusted in there by the staff. I had a reputation as somebody that did get in trouble a lot. And so just because I knew I wasn't doing that anymore, that doesn't mean that the prison system knew I wasn't doing that anymore. And so I had to still suffer consequences from my actions in the same way that prison was the consequences for my actions, for the stealing money. And even though that happened years ago, I'm still suffering the consequences. I found myself still getting some backlash. I was picking up a lot of petty cases that, I mean, for empty chip bags and that kind of thing, because I had already had such a reputation with the staff that they were going to get me for everything they could. And I had to ride that out. It took about a year and a half for all of that to settle down. And then all of a sudden, I was getting trusted again by the staff, and I wasn't getting singled out, and that was a good feeling. As silly as it sounds, not to, I know how the staff can be in there. That whole environment is harsh. And it sounds so silly for me to say that it did feel good to get that trust, though, and that acknowledgement from some of those staff members, just that were seeing me, that were seeing that I had stopped. And I'll be darned, just a couple of years after that, they let me go home, on parole. So I've been home go ahead, please.
So this was your first time getting in trouble with the law, and they hit you with 20 years. That's crazy.
Yes. Yeah, it was a big sentence. I was in a very small town, and the victims in my crime or at my job, the owners of that company, they're prominent men in that company, and they had close ties with the DA. And Brandon, they offered me 40 years at first.
Yeah, me too.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's nuts. I talked to a lot of guys who were unjustly sentenced, like my friend Tracy. It was his first time. They gave him 50 years. And for a non-ag crime, they gave you 20 years. That's just kind of outrageous. So then what was going through your mind going to prison? Had you had any background in that culture or knowing what's going on there? Or are you just totally green?
Yeah, no, I was absolutely green. And it was a culture shock. My parents, I was raised to have an open mind about people. And I remember having conversations with my mom. They're kind of like hippies. And I remember my mom talking to me when I was starting school, talking to me about race and just how people grow up differently and everybody believes different things, but we're all same on the inside. Like, I remember being taught this, but I was taught that, but I was still raised in a very middle-class, white, suburban neighborhood. And so it was a culture shock. I remember talking to my parents, my first visit. I did my intake unit in Dayton at Plain State Jail. And it was very, obviously prison is very diverse. And I remember at visit, I was telling my mom, like, there are so many different people here. It was a little bit intimidating going into that. What I did find, though, is how everybody was just kind of in the same boat. And there wasn't a whole lot of, I think men's different units are quite different. And the way that TV portrays even some women's units to be. In Texas, it's just not that. Women, there's not really segregation by race. There's not segregation by neighborhoods or where you're from. We were just kind of all in it together. And that was really beautiful. It was something really, I was able to get so much from that. I learned how people come from different backgrounds and how things like poverty, generational incarceration, substance abuse disorder, mental health disorders, all of those childhood traumas, how those can play a factor into the decisions that young adults make that land them in prison for a very long time. And it's just things that I had never thought about. And what's awesome about that is I learned that. I would have not ever probably looked at that. And then I'm talking about it with my family, and then all of a sudden my family knows it. And then, and it just goes on and on. And I think it's an important fact of our society that we need to know. So.
So you did initially start out trying to get a vocation and enrolling in college, and then somewhere after a few years, you just sort of took a nosedive with all of these other factors surrounding you. So I guess then what prompted you to enroll in college or vocation? Had you had any college education previously?
I had some college, and when I went into the system, they put me in F dorm, which is kind of it's where you don't get in trouble. It's the trustee dorm. And there were a lot of college students in there. And so that was what everybody was doing. And so
Yes.
I kind of went with the flow. I didn't have any major educational goals. At that point, I didn't know, didn't have a clue what my life would look like outside. At that point, I really thought I would make my first parole, and I wouldn't even be there that long, and my life would kind of be the same. I didn't know, that my kids were going to be grown and all of those things that happen while we're in prison. So.
Yeah. How old were they when you went in?
I had 2 in diapers when I went in. I was committing my crime before I got pregnant. And then over the course of 3.5 years, I had 2 babies. And I had 3 in middle school from my first marriage. And I came home, and my 3 middle schoolers were grown. My second son had 2 baby boys of his own. And my 2 babies were in middle school. And it was a whole new world. I was very fortunate. There's so many parents in prison that don't have a lot of contact with their kids. Some of them don't even know where their kids are. They might be in the system. I was really fortunate that my kids' dads took care of them. I've been married twice, so I have kind of 2 sets of kids there, and they both went to their dads when I got locked up. And both of their dads allowed them to come see me in prison. And so my little ones kind of grew up with watching me. Yeah. They watched me in there. Annabelle, she was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was on the phone with her, and she says, "Mom, where are you?" And now she came and visited me about once a month. And I said, "I'm at the place where you come visit me." And she said, where all those tables? And I said, "Well, I'm in that same area, but I'm in a dorm." And I kind of explained the dorm. And she got quiet for a minute. She said, "Oh, I thought maybe you were in jail." Like it was they just started putting the pieces together, but that's how they knew me. Coming home to middle schoolers after our relationship has been very institutionalized. Our interaction has been in a prison visitation room. That came with a whole new set of challenges, which it was like exciting and scary. I was nervous. Brandon, I was nervous.
That was my follow-up question, was whether you had an opportunity to stay in relationship with them, because I know a lot of people don't. And that would be interesting to hear from you. I know with the guys, a lot of them have, in my opinion, they have unrealistic expectations about what they're going to do when they get out with their kids. And, I have tried to say that, depending on how long they've been locked up, whether their kids had a relationship with them, how old they are, all of these things are going to play into what actually happens with their relationship. And I think a lot of them believe that they're just going to step out and be dad again, and everything's all good. What was your experience there?
Being a mother, that never changes. You're still mom. If you're incarcerated, you're still mom. But just stepping into that free world mom role was super challenging, and not just for my younger kids. My adult children needed me as mom. They're almost more needy than my middle school daughters. I think my middle school daughters grew up knowing, I mean, they call dad, and when there's an issue, they still go to dad first. But my older kids, we had that bond where I was the go-to lady for so long, and it was a challenge. My middle school daughters, that age is still hard anyway for any parent. Kids are trying to find out who they're going to be at that age.
Yeah.
I knew that I wasn't going to go home. I was also really fortunate, Brandon, because their dad never took my parental rights. And so we do have joint custody. But they're at that age where their friends are the most important things in their minds. Yes. And it's hard to get them to come. They live a couple hours away. So instead of seeing them every other weekend, I'm seeing them about every 6 to 8 weeks. And so that's a challenge. There's it's a bit of a power struggle because they have never had to take direction from me. They're not trusting my judgment on things because of they grew up with me in prison, and it's like sometimes it's not easy. None of it's easy, and for any mother that I know coming out of the system, it's not easy. But man, those little moments. I'm 2 years out now, and so I'll say that first of all, it gets easier every day. Parenting gets easier. We're all healing together, and every day we get just a little healthier. Our relationship gets a little healthier. But every mother that I know is struggling with that same kind of thing, earning their kids' trust back. The trust is not just automatically there. The love is there. The love didn't go anywhere, but the trust and even a little bit of the respect. They have respect on a surface level, but I can tell inside not so much,
Yeah.
And it's a challenge.
I know that sometimes the ladies, they don't have any control over whether they have a relationship with their kids because maybe the father took them or whatever. Over those who have some sort of an opportunity to have a relationship with their children, what are some things that were really helpful to you in keeping that bond together?
When my family came to visit and the kids were there, I think oftentimes when you have a table full of adults with a couple of little kids, it's the adults talking and the kids are kind of an afterthought. My family would sit back, and their dad would come to visit. And even though we didn't have a marital relationship any longer, he would come and he'd just sit back. And anybody who did time with me has probably seen him at visit with his cowboy hat kind of tilted down, almost like he was sleeping. He would just sit in the and let me do my thing with my girls. And we kind of learned that even when my mom or my grandmother brought them, any of my kids, they would sit back and let me have that time to be able to directly talk to my kids. They wouldn't really insert too much into the visit, except for, hey, don't forget to tell your mom about this or something like that. And I think that was hugely helpful. I would also just, man, even during those times, because there were times when I was in medium custody, they were not bringing my kids. They were not letting my kids see me behind that glass like that. You lose those contact visits. They weren't doing it. And I just made sure that I was writing often. I didn't even get to talk to them on the phone that often because the little girl's bedtime was our day room time for phone calls. So I was just making sure that I was sending home. And I don't think you can send home too much art. I'm not sure the mailroom rules have changed in the past couple of years. So I'm not really sure, but I was drawing pictures, any kind of artwork that I could hustle up from other people. I was doing that. I was sending them home. They got cards for everything you can think of. Happy, and they had a collection. All my kids had a collection of that. I just wanted to make sure that they knew I was thinking about them, and that even though I wasn't there and couldn't be there, that they were still important to me. I don't know. I prayed a lot for my kids to learn from my incarceration and not let that be an excuse for them to follow down the same path. And so far we're doing well, but yeah. Brandon, there was a lot of ladies that I was incarcerated with that didn't have contact with their children. And then we get home and they are able to see them, or they do find them, or even they get them back from the system. Those kind of things happen. And those ladies, there are a couple that journaled to their kids and kept a journal, and it didn't even. And one lady in particular, I'll just use her for an example. She kept a journal, and it wasn't heavy and deep and like soul. She didn't have to do all of that. I'll slow down. I'm sorry about the background. It's my dogs are going crazy at the door. I apologize. So she kept a journal for her kids. She had 2 children. They were in foster care during her incarceration, and she lost her parental rights while she was incarcerated and was able to get out. And her daughter aged out of the system and got contact with her there. And then the foster family of her son, she was able to get visits and get to see him. But what she did have is this little notebook, and she had just put things like, I woke up this morning remembering when you were 2 and you did this, and this happened today. I saw this little boy at visit today, and I was laughing so hard because it reminded me,
Yeah.
And I think that was not only beneficial for her mental health and for her journey in healing, because it is traumatic when we mess up bad enough that it lands us in prison, or if we didn't even mess up that bad and the system kind of came down hard on us. Either of those things are traumatic. And so when we're writing those things, I think it's really beneficial to oneself and also to their children. And she's been able to use that as a tool for her kids that are now almost grown. But yeah. I think it's a relationship. So,
yeah, well, that's amazing. I think those are 2 really good things about letting the kids be in the forefront of the conversations. And then for those who are not able to be with their kids or have a relationship, to journal about it. My friend Tracy has a journal that he kept up over 25 years, and his relationship with at least one of his kids has not fully been restored yet, but having that account of all of your memories and just things that you did, I think that's really valuable. So I think that's good advice. I don't know from you all's perspective, but I think that's good advice for even the guys too. So then on a 20-year, so how many times were you denied parole before they finally let you go?
So on a 20-year sentence, you're eligible for parole for 28 months, which is how my attorney got me to sign for that time. You'll
be out in 2 years or something.
Right, exactly. If you behave. So in my mind, I thought, okay, at 28 months, if it takes 3 years for me to get home, I'll be home before my older kids graduate high school. I'll be home before my babies go to kindergarten. And I was able to kind of accept that mentally and emotionally. And so the first parole, they denied me. And the reasons were out of my control, significant monetary loss. I'm never going to change the amount of money that I took.
Like the nature of the crime and all that kind of stuff. Stuff that, you can't, it's so ridiculous that why bring you up for parole? They're just going to use that against you.
Yeah, exactly. We're working on some legislation for that. It's not going to go this year, but it went far. It passed the House. So maybe next session we can do something with it.
Yeah.
But so denied then, and then the next year, and then the next year. And then I kind of nosedived and I went all the way down. I lost my lines. So then I wasn't even seeing parole. There was about a 2.5 year where I didn't see them. And so when I kind of came out of that hole that I had dug myself into in there, uh, and stopped getting cases, I got my lines back. And then, so I only actually saw them and got denied, I think, 4 times, because
Yeah.
after that, I didn't get to see him for a couple times. So,
Yeah, that's still a lot. And it's still so I thought there had been legislation in the past that was somewhat successful on the idea that you can't make parole because of the nature of the crime or whatever it was that you were convicted of. So I'm glad that you all are still pursuing something like that, because it just seems like almost like double jeopardy. Why even bring you up if they're just going to keep saying that over and over again?
it is, and it's disheartening, and it makes for kind of an uglier environment in there, because it kind of takes away that idea that if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
you have opportunity to go. So what we're hoping is that we'll change some of those stipulations of denial into things that are obtainable,
Yeah.
not, parole will say, okay, we're not letting you go this time, but because we want you to do this. And then, you have that in your mind. And I think that will just make a healthier environment in the prisons also.
So what was it like finally being released then after 10 years?
So, Brandon, I got an FI-5 and they sent me to Safe P.
Mm.
And so it was like, yeah, I made parole, but I'm not going home right now.
Right.
And so that was a little bit, it was like bittersweet. It's hard to explain. My kids were old enough to understand, okay, you are coming home, but it's not now. But it still, it took a toll on us, honestly. So it took me a couple months to pull chain to Safe P. And then I make it to Safe P, and it's COVID. And so that was a little bit frustrating because we're not even programming. And I just remember thinking, why am I even here? They were
Right.
throwing.
Because you didn't have a substance abuse. That was not a part of your crime, but they still sent you to substance abuse.
They absolutely just still sent me there. When I got there, they do like an intake and they talk about all of your past alcohol use, any drug use. And, my family are hippies and I have smoked marijuana less than a handful. And that's my drug history. I'm just not, I'm a person that very much likes to be in control of situations. And so I drink socially throughout my life. I've drank socially, but I never really got out of control. I wasn't getting inebriated, and because I just wanted to be in control. That's just my personality. And so when we're going through this, my substance abuse counselor, because that's what she was, she just looks at me. She says, "Why are you here?" I said,
Who knows? Nobody knows.
Right. That's a great question, ma'am. That's a great question. She said, I have to diagnose you with something, with a substance. And she said, I'm just going to put alcoholism because it's what else can I do? That's what you've done the most in your life, And so I was nervous that would affect me somehow out here. I don't know why, like if they put a title on me that wasn't accurate, that would just further hinder me. It hasn't at all. That title doesn't go anywhere, just in case that happens to anyone else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went through that, and we weren't, like I said, we weren't programming because of COVID. The counselors weren't even coming into the dorm. They were throwing packets underneath the door, and we were just signing, saying that we did things. And it was really crazy. And it was a little bit frustrating because I had all of this anxiety about coming back into the free world. I had been gone 10 years and I was nervous about how my interactions would be with my family. I was nervous about where I was going to work. All of these things. I was fortunate enough, Brandon, because I came home to some privilege. We're just kind of a lower middle class family, but my family has homes and my family has jobs. So I knew that I didn't have to like worry immediately about where I was going to sleep or what I was going to eat. And I know that's the case for a lot of people. But my worries were more of how am I going to build a life now after this? How is it going to be? I have a really large family. I knew that my family would be my core family, my parents and my grandparents and my brother. I knew that that would be okay because I had been interacting with them the whole time. But I have all these cousins and aunts and uncles and just this huge family that I hadn't seen or talked to or heard from. And yeah, I was nervous. So I'm here at this program feeling all of these crazy feelings and emotions, and we're not even programming. Like I couldn't work through it. That might have been an opportunity for me to work through some of that. So anyways, yeah, I had to go to a halfway house too, because of that was part of the stipulation of my parole with the FI-5.
Yeah.
So I went to a halfway house in Bryan, and the rules were really harsh there. I was surprised. I think I had expectations that it would be more like a place for me to stay while I was working and getting things done for the free world. And it was really strict. You had to ask everywhere you went. You're not just stopping by Chick-fil-A and getting a chicken sandwich. It's not work. It doesn't work that way. You're going to your job if you get a job and come back, and you are programming there. The visitation was closed because of COVID. So that was really frustrating. They had community phones, and you could only make 1 10-minute phone call a day. And that was really hard. It was hard. I had 3 adult kids, my parents, my grandparents, my little girl's dad, and I'm trying to make arrangements for life. Yeah. And I have access only to the phone for 10 minutes. It was,
a lot of these halfway houses can be so restrictive as to not be very productive for the person staying there at all. So what made you want to get into content creation? Did you have a background in that? Was it a plan, or it just sort of fell in your lap? How did that begin?
When I got incarcerated, there was only MySpace. So there was Facebook had just come out, and like we were just all kind of seeing who we went to school with that was on there. That's so I definitely wasn't creating content before. Actually, the year that I got home, my parents had a big wedding anniversary. COVID was kind of ending. My brother had released a new EP album. He's a musician. And so we have a big party, and there are several hundred people there. I'm up on stage a lot, introducing the bands, asking people to tip the bands, talking about my parents' marriage. They renewed their vows that night. And me and my brother were kind of hosting this event. And my brother's saying, yeah, we just have so much to celebrate. My sister's home, and I could see people kind of looking at each other like, where's she been?
Yeah, right.
I was gone for 10 years, but my family, they didn't, even though in our community, in our local community in Fort Worth, my dad and my brother are known. They're musicians. They people know them, and they didn't just make it publicly known that I was in prison. So only just a handful of their friends, close friends, knew where I was. And I had mixed emotions about that. I could see, like I knew at the event that people didn't know. And so then the next day I call my brother. I'm like, what's up? And he said, I don't know. Mom and Dad didn't want to tell everybody. I don't know, and I told my parents, I felt, I'll use a prison term, I felt some type of way for seriousness. I definitely felt like, man, and so I talked to my parents, and my dad just said, Marci, we didn't know how you would want that handled when you got home. And we didn't want you to stepping into a situation where you felt uncomfortable. That's your story, And for me, I just feel like, yes, I went to prison. And even though that's definitely not the norm in my family or in their circle, it's what happened. It's what happened. I'm not the only person that has ever made a decision that they're not proud of, even in that crowd that has never been in legal trouble. Everyone has that. And people that have been to prison have just made a decision that has led them there. Everybody has things in their past they don't want people to know or wouldn't be proud of. So I accepted that. I didn't feel, I didn't feel like bad because my dad said that. That made sense to me. But what I did is I had been watching TikToks and I was like, I had been putting little things like my first Christmas home, and a picture of my tree, just not really content for the masses, but content for me and my family. Yeah. And I did one with my mugshot. I did a little TikTok video and I said, well, guys, I did something crazy today. I Googled my name and this popped up and I showed the picture. And it was just a little 20-second video, but then I put it on my parents' Facebook pages. And, I just wanted people to know this is where I've been. And it doesn't have to be this big elephant in the room. It's part of my history. It's part of my story. It's what it is. I can't change it. And if you have questions about it, you can ask me. If you don't want to talk about it, we don't have to. It's, but that it's it, And that video, people just started asking me questions and I just started answering. I just started there's something really freeing. While I was committing my crime, I was having to tell so many lies to literally everybody. Nobody knew what I was doing. So all the people that were closest to me, it was just lie after lie after lie. It was not a peaceful existence. And one of the things that I had resolved to while I was incarcerated is I wasn't going to do that. I was going to be authentically me. And if I was doing something or if there was a situation where I felt like I needed to lie, I probably shouldn't be in that situation. And I was going to accept that that wasn't what I needed to be doing instead of just lie after lie after lie. And there's something really freeing about that, Brandon, just being able to say what it is and not have to make up things to cover your tracks. And I've kind of taken that. I might be a little bit of an oversharer now because literally every single thing that people ask me, I just put it out there. Yes. This. Yes. Where were my kids while I was locked up? They were here. I mean, just, have you forgiven yourself? Well, I'm working on that. Like just every question. And TikTok they took to me and it just kind of blew up.
Yeah. Well, I did not plan to do social media, and it was actually 2 years ago today because my phone and its creepy artificial intelligence reminded me that I was sitting in my graduation, in the graduation ceremony, and I decided to post a picture on LinkedIn, which is not known as a big social media thing, and I put my ID. And I put my picture of my graduation gown and posted it, and it sort of went mini viral. I woke up the next day with 100,000 views. And so that's when I was like, well, I'll probably never get this much attention again. So if I'm going to do a YouTube thing, I better do it now. Yes. But it became pretty hard. It's a lot to learn about just the lights and the cameras and the software and posting to all the social medias with the different formats. This is kind of a headache. So I kind of stopped last year, and really until I met you all in Houston, and then Securus allowed me to put it on the podcast. That's on the tablets. That's when I decided, okay, maybe I'd start doing this again. But you're doing really well. Seen your Facebook and your TikToks. You're doing really well. And you have an interesting story, and you're just very sociable, agreeable. So it's no surprise. Well, What kind of advice would you give you've already given a lot of great advice, especially about keeping the ties together with the families, or even writing a journal. But what's some advice you could give some of the ladies who are still there? I'm going to be at Plain State Jail tonight. This I might be able to get this ready for them to see, but what would be some advice you could give to them about either how they should prepare for release or how they should be doing their time?
First, I want to let everybody that's incarcerated, especially in Texas, and Brandon, I care about the guys, I do, but the women, they're my heart. I have so many close friends and wonderful people that are still incarcerated, but I need you guys to know that there are so many people out here that are thinking about you, and outside of your family or maybe your friends. There are people out here fighting for positive changes in the system. There are out here people praying for you, rooting for you, that care about you. And we love you all. You are not forgotten. And I think it's easy to feel that way when you are inside. I was so surprised to come home and see this whole team of people that do care, people like Brandon, people that do care about people that are incarcerated, people that are trying to be positive examples in our community. We're trying to change the narrative out here so it's just a little less hard when you get out, and we're working positively and relentlessly towards that goal. I also want to say, let's see, advice for coming home. You talked a little bit about unrealistic expectations, Brandon, and I think that that's something that can happen easily. We have all of these big ideas and big goals, and I definitely encourage you to keep dreaming and keep working towards that end goal that might be a little bit bigger, but don't expect necessarily for it to happen right when you get home, and that it's okay to give yourself grace. It might not feel comfortable. As crazy as it sounds, it might not feel that comfortable when you get home into the free world, and that's okay. You can give yourself that grace. It's okay not to be, and it's okay to say no. So
Yeah.
I was pulled a lot of different directions. People want to show me this, people want to show me that. My kids, all of a sudden, they're calling me for things that they would call their mom for, but I didn't have that while I was inside. And so it's okay if you start to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to say, okay, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, people, and I need a break. I just need 5 minutes or one day. And I think that sometimes we feel a little less deserving of that self-care when we're coming out of prison, but that self-care is really important for your emotional and mental state. And so I encourage you to do that.
Well, I bet your
Yeah.
kids were excited that they could just call you now. just
Yes. Yes, it's amazing. I don't know. And Brandon, my kids struggle with separation anxiety, depression, regular anxiety. They were traumatized by my incarceration, and we're all healing from that. And so I'll let you know also that healing process is slow. I think maybe I had this idea that I would come home and everything would just be great, but in
Yes.
actuality, it's a process. It doesn't just happen overnight. And 2 years out, it's so much better. Everybody is so much healthier than we were 2 years ago, and so I know that continue to get better. But yeah, those phone calls like, Mom, my son he flew to New York this weekend, and he has very high anxiety, and he got to the hotel room and he said, I'm freaking out. And he was in a bit of a panic attack, but I was
Yes.
able to talk to him for a half hour, and we just worked it through. And sometimes that's just all they need, is to be able to vocalize that. And he said, thank you so much for answering. And I just thought, I always answer, kiddo, for you. And it's something that he was without for so long, that those little things are so precious for both of us. It's so important for both of us that he's able to call me. And there's lots of
Yeah.
little moments. So,
And also about for those who are inside and maybe don't have any family or friends that they're out there for. One of the things I was telling Alexa the other day is, we're going to have a conference in September, our Texas Correctional Ed Conference. And there were several workshops I was thinking of, one of which was political advocacy. And as I was thinking through, who could I ask to speak on political advocacy? It was all of you ladies. There was no dudes that I could think of. I was like, well, there's Marci, Maggie, Alexa, Jennifer, Lauren, like all these. So that in itself is really encouraging for them, because it's not like you all are out here with like a particular person in mind. You're doing this for the betterment of all of them, and you still have all of them on your mind. And when I started to, or at least my goal when I wanted to get back involved with prison, is I had a short sentence, but I imagined the guys who had long sentences and who didn't have the grandmother I had who would send me stuff and didn't have that kind of relationship. And so I wanted to create some sort of program that was really catered to them, people who didn't have anybody and people who had big time. So the tablets are going to be an amazing, opportunity for, education and communication. But yeah, I would like to encourage them as well, even if you don't have anybody that you're writing or in contact with. There are people out here who are working as best they can to try and help the situation. I'm not so much as involved in political advocacy as you all. I'm stay remaining in teaching, but all of those variables are important for the bigger picture. So I think it's really awesome what you all do. Y'all make me jealous.
Well, it takes everybody. Everybody has their own what they bring to the table, right? And you're in there doing footwork. Yeah, it's everybody. Can I plug SLC and Linus, because they can write those organizations? Is that okay?
Yes.
Or is that?
Oh yeah. I was going to ask both Maggie and Jennifer to do a thing talking about them. So yeah, definitely.
Awesome. So there are two organizations that I'm a part of that are made up of previously incarcerated members and currently incarcerated members. And we are busy doing ledge work to make things better in the system. So those two organizations for women only is Lioness, Justice Impacted Women's Alliance. And we send newsletters into the prisons, and we have about 200 incarcerated members right now, but we're listening to you guys. And that's an outlet that you can write if you have concerns, or if you just need to talk. We have people that write. So you feel free to write them. And then the one that's for men and women is Statewide Leadership Council. And it's made up of previously incarcerated people. These guys are powerhouses. When we go into the Capitol, the legislators know. They know Statewide Leadership Council, and they're listening to us. And it's so insane to know that 2 years ago, I was in a prison, all whites, and now I'm at the ledge talking to senators about what needs to change in the prison system. But organizations, you can join while you're incarcerated. You don't have to wait till you get out. I don't know, Brandon, I don't know if you have a way to put the address on their tablets, but okay, I'll make sure you have those addresses, Brandon, so that the PO.
Well, what I'll do is at the end of this, I'll just have it on the screen for them to run.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, great. Yeah, I always want to give them opportunities to be in contact. So at the end of these, I also have a PO box in Huntsville where they can write me, and so I can put Linus and Statewide Leadership Council on there. It's not a problem.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this for me this morning. I've really enjoyed watching your TikToks. You think this has been so long since I've been locked up. I've stayed basically in the system because I work in there, but a lot of your TikToks are so hilarious because it's all still very vivid to you. It's not as vivid to me anymore. So when you bring up these scenarios, I'm like, it's applicable to me and the guys as well. It's just hilarious. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Brandon. I appreciate you and everything that you're doing for the system as well.
All right. Well, thank you. You have a great rest of your day.
Okay. You too, Brandon. Bye.